I was the first man my wife had ever been with. We got married, and for 10 years, I thought everything between us was fine. Then, one day, my friends dropped a bombshell. They told me that for all those years, she had been acting horribly behind my back. At first, I didn't believe them. I thought they were lying or mistaken. But the evidence I found later left no doubt. Cameras don't lie. Let me explain how it all unfolded. Alice and I first met in 9th grade. We started dating not long after, and by sophomore year, we were known as the couple in our school. We never had any big problems during high school. And, in a very cliché high school romance moment, we decided to share our first time together on prom night. That night deepened our connection, and after that, we took every opportunity to be close like that. By junior year, we were already discussing marriage. The plan was simple: finish college, then tie the knot. But once college started, Alice began to change in ways I didn't expect. In high school, everyone respected our relationship. The other guys stayed away from Alice because they knew she was with me. But in college, things were different. There were only a few people from high school, but most of the students were strangers. Alice was just another attractive girl on campus, and she got a lot of attention from the guys. It was something I noticed but felt powerless to stop. Our schedules didn't match well. We had separate classes, and I worked evening shifts, so the only time we had together was at night when we were both free. The attention Alice got from other guys started to affect her. She became more outgoing and flirtatious. I would see her laughing and talking with other guys, sometimes from a distance, like across the quad, where she never saw me watching. A few times, I passed by the student union and noticed her sitting in the cafeteria with another guy. One time, it was 2 of them. Looking back, I realize now that I never saw her hanging out with other girls. It was always guys. But at the time, I didn't think much of it. I trusted her. We were in love and planning a future together. That love felt solid, unshakable. She was mine, or so I thought. Every night we spent together seemed to confirm that. Alice was beautiful, and I figured the attention from other guys was just something we had to deal with. I didn't see it as a threat. After all, we had history, and she always came back to me. After college, we both found jobs, got married, and began what I believed was a perfect life. For almost 6 years, I lived in that bubble, convinced everything was fine. Then, suddenly, my world fell apart. It all started on a Thursday afternoon while I was at work. Sophie, a mailroom employee, delivered a stack of files, including one that wasn't even mine. It belonged to Derek Porter, an old friend from high school and college. While glancing through the file, I noticed a massive error, nearly $3 million off. I was about to fix it when Derek rushed into my office in a panic. He was presenting to Apex and needed that file corrected immediately. I pointed out the mistake, and he looked ready to collapse. After thanking me profusely, he grabbed the file and ran off to make the changes in time. That evening, as usual for Thursdays, Alice was working late on payroll for Friday's checks. My own routine was simple: stop by Bud's bar for a burger and a couple of beers before heading home. I was halfway through my second beer when Derek walked in. He spotted me, came over, and slid into my booth. He ordered a drink and insisted on covering my tab as thanks for saving him earlier. We started talking about work and catching up on mutual friends. Then, completely out of the blue, Derek asked me why I tolerated Alice's behavior. His question hit me like a brick. I asked what he meant, completely confused. Derek paused, realizing I didn't know what he was talking about. He tried to brush it off and leave, but I stopped him, demanding an explanation. After hesitating for a moment, he sat back down, his face filled with regret. What he told me next shattered everything I thought I knew. Derek revealed that Alice had a bad reputation, one that went all the way back to high school. And then, with clear discomfort, he admitted that he had been involved with her himself. Stunned and reeling, I insisted that he tell me everything, no matter how ugly it was. Derek's story spilled out like a dam breaking. He told me that just weeks after our senior prom, he walked into his cousin Henry's house and found Alice there, with Henry. They saw him but didn't seem to care. In fact, Derek said he soon became part of it. They took turns with her until Alice finally said she needed to clean up and meet me after my shift at Jessup's Market. And that wasn't the only time. Every time I was working, Alice and Derek would find time to be together. When Henry got into a serious relationship, Alice stuck with Derek, at least until he caught her with two other guys, James Crossman and Brian Hancock. Instead of walking away, Derek admitted he joined in. This pattern continued all through high school and even into college. I sat there, frozen, as he laid it all out. 10 years. 10 years of betrayal. And it had all been happening right under my nose. Derek tried to excuse himself, saying we weren't that close back then and that he didn't think my relationship with Alice was serious. But his reasons didn't matter. The only thing I could think about was how blind I'd been all this time. During Alice's first semester of college, her schedule was pretty straightforward. She had classes Monday through Thursday and Tuesday through Friday, with Wednesdays free. Her last class each day ended around 1 or 2 in the afternoon. I don't remember exactly. Meanwhile, I'd finish my own classes and head straight to work. While I was busy putting in hours at my job, Alice was busy in other ways. Instead of heading home, she was heading to someone else's bedroom. Wednesdays became full-day escapades that carried on throughout her college years. Her class schedule might have changed from semester to semester, but her extracurricular activities stayed consistent. I'm not saying it happened every single day, but 2 or 3 times a week. That was her routine. Looking back, it made sense why people were so surprised when Alice and I got married. Most of them assumed I already knew about her behavior. Some even thought I was okay with it, that maybe I enjoyed the attention she got. Hearing all this from Derek left me crushed. I had been completely in the dark. Then Derek added something that made my stomach turn. Rob, if you didn't know about all that, there's probably even more you don't know. Like her Thursday nights with Todd and Dan Matthews. Or her Tuesdays with Luke Aldridge while you were at the bowling alley. Honestly, I'm not sure who else she's been with or when. But one thing's for sure. If you're busy, Alice is probably busy with someone else. Derek told me, for what it was worth, that he had stopped sleeping with Alice after we got married. He said, a single woman's one thing, but a married woman? That's a whole different story. By this point, I was too numb to respond. My mind was spinning. But one thing was clear. I couldn't ignore this anymore. I finished my beer, stood up, and thanked Derek for both the drink and, in a bitter twist, the truth he'd just unloaded on me. The drive home was a haze. My head swirled with questions. Could I believe him? On one hand, I couldn't imagine Alice betraying me like that. She loved me, didn't she? But on the other hand, why would Derek lie? He had no reason to. He knew I could verify his story, and if it turned out to be false, we couldn't keep working together. He had to know that. Yet, the thought of continuing to work with him after hearing all this felt unbearable. The more I thought about it, the more things started to click. Back when we were teenagers, hormones drove everything. If I hadn't been with Alice and some other guy's girlfriend made a move on me, I might have gone for it too. But this wasn't about a one-time thing. This was 10 years of betrayal. 10 years of lies. When I got home, Alice was already there after finishing payroll. That night, as she reached out to me in bed, her hand brushed my shoulder. The touch made my skin crawl. For the first time, I felt nothing. No desire, no love, no connection. I turned away, pretending to be asleep. I couldn't face her. The next morning, I woke up early, brewing coffee, and reading the paper as if everything was normal. When she asked why I went to bed so early, I made up a quick excuse. I wasn't feeling great. Must have been something I ate, I told her. She just smiled and teased, well, you owe me double tonight. Her words felt like a slap, but I kept my composure. That day at work, I didn't waste any time. I reached out to William Johnson, an old high school friend who had since become a corporate lawyer. I asked if he could recommend a tough, no-nonsense divorce attorney. His response stopped me in my tracks. Rob, he said, if you're asking me this, I guess you've finally found out. I confirmed his suspicion, telling him that I'd only just learned the truth about Alice. After a moment of silence, William recommended Jack McAdam and told me to mention his name when I called. Without hesitation, I contacted McAdam and arranged a meeting for that afternoon. By 1 p.m., I was sitting in McAdam's office. He walked me through my options, which ranged from a peaceful split to a full-on scorched earth battle. Since our state didn't allow no-fault divorces, I needed hard evidence of Alice's infidelity. Rumors or hearsay wouldn't be enough. When I asked how to gather proof, McAdam handed me a card for Samuel Nelson, a private investigator whose office was right across the street. McAdam offered to call Nelson to see if he could meet me immediately. I agreed, eager to get the process moving. I also instructed McAdam to start the divorce paperwork, promising to provide the evidence as soon as I had it. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in Samuel Nelson's office, laying out my situation. He listened carefully and proposed a plan, warning me that I would have to act completely normal around Alice. She can't suspect a thing, he said. As hard as it might be, you have to keep up appearances. Everything inside me rebelled against the idea, but I knew he was right. I had to live the lie a little longer while the truth began to unravel the life I thought I knew. Nelson was brutally honest about what I needed to do. If you're usually close with your wife 3 or 4 times a week, you'll need to stick to that routine. Whether you're the one starting things or just going along with it, nothing can change. You can't let her see any cracks in the facade. As revolting as it sounded, I understood his logic. This isn't about love anymore, he added. It's about getting the truth and maintaining her trust just long enough to expose her. After our meeting, I returned to my office, my nerves frayed. I called Alice, sticking to our usual routines. Our weekly Friday night dinners and Sunday breakfasts had always been staples of our relationship, or at least I thought so. I suggested a restaurant for dinner that night, and she agreed, her voice cheerful and unsuspecting. I hated how natural she sounded, like nothing was wrong. That evening, we went out to dinner. As I picked at my veal marsala and Alice sipped her white wine over rigatoni, I forced myself to act normal. Meanwhile, across town, Nelson's team was busy installing wireless cameras and listening devices throughout our home. The thought of strangers combing through my personal life made me uncomfortable, but the idea of being lied to for so long made me angrier. As I sipped my Merlot, I replayed Nelson's warning in my head. Don't check for the cameras. It's a natural reaction, but if she catches you, everything will fall apart. In the bedroom, act natural. Pretend they don't exist. It's not about comfort. It's about uncovering the truth. I nodded along at Alice's jokes during dinner, smiling when appropriate, though inside, I felt like I was going to explode. Afterward, I suggested we go out for drinks or dancing, maybe to delay going home, or maybe just to throw her off. She declined, saying we should head home. You owe me for last night, she teased with a sly smile. On the drive back, she slid closer to me, her hands moving expertly. Drive careful, sweetie, she whispered. Wouldn't want to bite off something important. Her casual confidence enraged me. I clenched the steering wheel, struggling to keep my emotions in check. The way she acted, so practiced and sure, made me feel sick. This wasn't special. It was just another move she'd probably perfected with every man she'd been with. When we got home, Alice wasted no time, pulling me straight to the bedroom. I tried to follow Nelson's advice and act normal, but the thought of hidden cameras recording everything was too much. I turned off the system and left my phone on the car seat as a reminder to turn it back on when I left. That night wasn't about love. It was just going through the motions. Unfortunately, once wasn't enough for Alice. She demanded more, and I begrudgingly complied. Twice. By the time she finally let me sleep, I felt like I'd been performing in a grim, endless play. The next morning, I was up before her, lacing up my running shoes. Alice wandered into the kitchen, mentioning casually that she wouldn't be home when I got back. Hair appointment, she said. It's a long one, 9 to 2. I usually gossip with the girls and grab lunch after. She smiled as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Maybe it was true, but after everything I'd learned, I doubted it. More likely, she had plans with one of her flings, either before or after her appointment. Before leaving the house, I flipped the system back on. Nelson had emphasized consistency, so despite doubting anything would happen during my morning run, I flipped the switch to keep the listening devices and phone tap active. When I got back from my 5-mile run, I headed straight to the basement. Above my workbench, hidden in a cabinet, were the recorders Nelson's team had installed. One captured audio from the phone tap and listening devices. The other recorded video from the cameras. My hands trembled as I hit play. The first thing I heard was Alice's voice. "Hello," she said, her tone sweet and familiar. "Good morning, lover. Are we still on for today? The man's voice came through, casual and confident. You bet, he replied. Alice laughed softly. The wife took the kids to the zoo, so we've got until 6. Alice responded. I can't stay that long. I have to be home by 2. Rob's already asking why I'm out so late. Then skip the hair appointment and come over now, he suggested. Alice sighed, frustrated. And what do I tell Rob when my hair isn't done? The man chuckled. I don't know, baby. Make something up. I just want more time with you. That's when the voice clicked. It was my cousin, Jake. My stomach twisted in disgust. How many others had there been? How many people I knew and trusted had been part of this betrayal? By the time Alice returned from her so-called hair appointment, I'd calmed myself enough to play the part. I even faked a fall down the basement stairs, claiming I'd hurt my back. Must have pulled a muscle, I said. It was the perfect excuse to avoid any physical contact for a few days. On Monday, I called Alice at work and told her I'd be leaving town the next day for a business trip and wouldn't be back until Friday. Of course, there was no trip. I just needed time for the cameras to do their job. Alice typically stayed home during my business trips, and I made random nightly calls to ensure she was there. If she was cheating, and bold enough to do it in our bed, I was counting on the cameras to catch it. That evening, Alice wrapped her arms around my neck and leaned in close. I need something to hold me over while you're gone, she whispered, her voice dripping with faux affection. My injured back gave me the perfect excuse to refuse. Sorry, I said, still too sore. She looked disappointed, but I didn't care. I was playing the long game, and her attempts to manipulate me were just background noise. On Tuesday morning, Alice kissed me goodbye at the door, suitcase in hand, believing I was off on a 3-day trip. She had no idea what I was really planning. After leaving the house, I went to work, but by 3 p.m., I was parked a block away from our home, laptop in hand. I entered the code Nelson had provided and activated the surveillance software. With a few keystrokes, I tuned into the phone line recorder. The first call came almost immediately. Hello? Alice's voice was cheerful. Hey, handsome hunk, it's me, she said to whoever was on the other end. Hubby just left on a 3-day trip. You ready to spend 3 fun-filled nights with me? Does a duck walk barefoot on the beach? The man replied with a laugh. I'll take that as a yes, Alice giggled. I'll leave it to you to call Ryan. I've got to get out of here and get to work. I'll be home by 6. See you then. Her tone was light and playful, and it made my stomach churn. I shut the laptop, disgusted but determined. Picking up my phone, I called Jack McAdam, my attorney, and instructed him to have the divorce papers ready to serve by Thursday. I provided detailed instructions for how I wanted them delivered. McAdam mentioned that my plan would cost more than the standard process, but I didn't care. Whatever it took to make this unforgettable for Alice, I was willing to pay. Leaving the neighborhood, I checked into a modest motel across town with a restaurant and bar next door. For the next 3 days, this would be my base. The bar had a laid-back, country western vibe, complete with a jukebox playing classic tunes. Each night, a few unattached women ensured no man sat alone for long while the music played. That first night, I sipped a beer at the bar when a striking redhead approached me. Come on, sugar, she said with a playful grin. They're playing our song. Before I could protest, she pulled me onto the dance floor. As we moved to the music, she glanced up at me. Don't get the wrong idea, she said. I'm not looking for anything. I just love to dance, and you were sitting there. Her name was Megan, and after the dance, she invited me to join her and her friends, Jessica and Nicole, at their table. We spent the evening dancing, laughing, and, for the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of normalcy. Around 10:30, I called it a night. As I stood to leave, Megan smiled. Maybe we'll see you again, she said. I'm just next door at the motel, I replied. So there's a good chance I'll be back. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt almost positive about something. The next afternoon, I parked a block away from the house again and opened my laptop to review the footage from the previous night. 2 younger men, at least 6 years Alice's junior, appeared on the surveillance footage in the bedroom. It didn't take much to guess why. She was likely chasing some youthful thrill. The video itself was straightforward, documenting their activities without flair or drama. What caught my attention more was the audio. Part of me expected her to mock me or compare me unfavorably to her companions, but she didn't. The only mention of me came when one of the men asked about meeting more often. Alice shut it down quickly, saying, "Rob comes first. I can't just disappear whenever I want." That wasn't comforting. It felt less like loyalty and more like practicality, a way to avoid suspicion. On Wednesday, the same routine played out. The two men left at precisely 6 a.m., as Alice had instructed them, making sure to avoid the neighbors. She seemed confident no one nearby would be up that early. That afternoon, I called my attorney, Jack McAdam, and asked him to delay serving the divorce papers until Friday at 5:45 p.m. If Friday morning followed the same pattern, the timing would be perfect. Sure enough, on Friday morning, I parked down the street at 5:55 a.m. At exactly 6 a.m., the front door opened, and the two men stepped outside. Alice stood in the doorway, smiling as they turned to say goodbye. That's when the process server appeared, stepping into view. He handed the papers directly to Alice, said a polite, "You've been served," and walked away without a backward glance. Alice and her companions froze, staring after him in shock. I pulled up in front of the house, honked the horn, and waved cheerfully at Alice before driving off. Her face was pale, her expression stunned as she clutched the papers. I had made my point. Inside the envelope was a letter from me. I explained that I never wanted to speak to her again except through our attorneys. I made it clear I didn't want to hear her excuses, her declarations of love, or claims that it was meaningless. There would be no reconciliation, no explanations, just finality. But Alice ignored the letter. Within 15 minutes of driving off, my phone rang. It was her. I let it go to voicemail, along with the next 7 calls. When I arrived at work, I told my secretary, Nancy, about the situation. "Don't put through any calls from Alice," I instructed. "And if she shows up, tell her I'm not here. Say I'm meeting with a client." Nancy nodded but came back a few minutes later with a suggestion. "I talked to Victoria at the front desk," she said. "If your wife comes, she'll call me so you can sneak out the side door and wait at the cafe until she's gone." I thanked her, grateful for her support. A good secretary really is invaluable. By the end of the day, Alice had called me 17 times. I ignored everyone. During lunch, I called my dad and brother to update them on the situation. I asked my dad to tell my mom, but I made it clear that I didn't want her trying to convince me to reconcile. "That's going to be tough," my dad said. "She thinks of Alice as the daughter she never had." "I don't care," I replied. "This is my decision." After work, I lingered in my office, finishing up tasks. There was no reason to rush home anymore. For the first time in years, I had nowhere else I needed to be. Before I left, Nancy stopped by with one last update. "Your wife called 5 times this morning," she said. "I told her every time that I wasn't allowed to put her through. I think she's finally gotten the message. She hasn't called since noon." I thanked her and left around 7 p.m. In the lobby, I noticed Victoria was gone, but Frank, the night watchman, greeted me warmly. "Hot date with the missus tonight?" he teased. "No, Frank," I replied. "We're getting a divorce, and she's outside waiting to talk. I don't want to." Frank's expression shifted to one of understanding. "Ah, been there," he said, revealing he'd gone through 2 divorces himself. I told him not to let Alice into the building or open the door if she knocked. I also claimed my car was in the lot due to a breakdown and would be towed in the morning. "Got it," Frank said. "Don't worry, I'll handle it." I exited through the back door, circled the block, and crossed the street to Dave's diner. From a seat near the window, I watched Alice waiting by my car, looking increasingly frustrated. Halfway through my meal, she approached the building and pressed the intercom. Moments later, she returned to her car and drove off, no doubt after hearing Frank's message. Satisfied, I finished my dinner, lingered over coffee, and then headed to a nearby bar for a couple of beers. Though several women seemed eager to find a dance partner, I wasn't in the mood. After 2 beers, I called it a night. The next morning, I had a busy schedule, tackling tasks I should have addressed earlier. My first stop was the bank, where I emptied our joint accounts and retrieved my personal documents and certificates of deposit from the safe deposit box. I left Alice's belongings untouched, placing my wedding ring inside for her to find later. Afterward, I had breakfast at the Waffle House while canceling our joint credit cards. I kept the Visa and American Express in my name, but left Alice's individual cards untouched. This ensured she couldn't rack up debt on our shared accounts. I returned to the motel, parked my car, and rented a cheap car from Avis for anonymity. Back at the motel, I spent the afternoon by the pool with a book. My phone stayed off, but when I powered it on before dinner, there were 9 missed messages from Alice. I deleted them all without listening. That evening, I went back to the bar, where a live band was playing. The place was packed, and I barely found a seat. As I sipped my beer, I felt a gentle tug on my shirt. Turning, I saw Megan standing there, her red hair glowing in the dim light. "Hey, cowboy," Megan said with a playful grin as she tugged on my arm. "Why are you sitting here when there's a seat waiting for you at our table?" I chuckled and replied, "If I'd seen you, I wouldn't have dared to intrude. Didn't want to assume." "Nonsense," she said, grabbing my arm. "Come on." I followed her back to the table, where Jessica and Nicole greeted me warmly. As I looked around, I joked, "There's something wrong with this picture. 3 beautiful women sitting here alone, and no guys swarming you." Megan laughed. "Oh, we get plenty of attention, but it's usually from idiots. They see the wedding rings and assume we're here to cheat. Most of them don't get it. We're just here to dance." Jessica chimed in, "The decent ones, like you, are rare. That's why you've got an open invitation to join us anytime." I hesitated before asking, "It's not really my business, but why are 3 gorgeous married women spending time in a place like this without your husbands?" Megan nodded thoughtfully. "Fair question. Jessica's husband is in the Army Reserve, and his unit got sent overseas. She was losing her mind stuck at home, so Nicole and I decided to get her out. Nicole's husband works afternoons, and my husband's a long-haul trucker. He's gone for weeks at a time. So we stick together. We love to dance, and this is our escape." "What about you?" Jessica asked, her eyes glancing at my hand. "You had a ring last time we saw you, and now it's gone." I explained briefly. "I handed my wife divorce papers yesterday and left the ring where she'd find it." Megan raised an eyebrow. "Does that mean you're free to pursue something new?" "Not at all," I replied firmly. "The grounds were infidelity, and I won't do anything that could give her leverage in a countersuit." Jessica smiled knowingly. "Fair enough. But at least we've got a reliable dance partner now." The night flew by as we danced until closing time. Occasionally, other men joined us, but the 3 women made it clear they preferred my company. Sunday was a quiet day. I lounged by the pool, finished my book, and enjoyed the peace. By Monday, I hoped Alice would still believe I was out of town. I returned the rental car and drove my own vehicle to work, but that turned out to be a mistake. When I left the building at the end of the day, Alice was waiting by my car. As I approached, she stepped in front of the driver's side door, blocking my way. "We need to talk," she said firmly. I didn't respond. I walked past her, opened my car door, and tried to get inside. Gently but firmly, I pushed her aside, causing her to stumble briefly before regaining her balance. I rolled down the window, keeping my tone calm. "You need to read the letter that came with the divorce papers," I said. "I'm not going to talk to you without my attorney present, and any conversation we have will only concern the divorce." Alice's face twisted with frustration. "I don't want a divorce. I don't want to lose you," she exclaimed. "I love you. I need you." Her words sounded hollow to me. I shook my head. "It's over, Alice," I replied. "You need to accept that. I'm not changing my mind." I rolled up the window and drove away, leaving her standing there, stunned and silent. On Tuesday, as I was leaving work, 2 men approached me in the parking lot. I recognized them immediately. They were the same 2 guys who'd been in my bedroom with Alice. One grabbed my left arm, and the other took my right. "Don't resist," one of them said, his tone menacing but controlled. "Alice wants to talk to you. And since you're being difficult, we're taking you to her." My first instinct was to fight back. They were younger and looked tough, but they clearly underestimated me in my suit and tie. If I acted quickly enough, I could probably make enough of a scene to draw attention. But then I hesitated. If Alice was desperate enough to pull something like this, What would she try next if I sent these two back to her beaten and bruised? They shoved me into my car and slid in beside me, sandwiching me between them. Drive, one of them ordered. I didn't argue. We arrived at the house shortly after, and they escorted me inside. Alice was waiting, her expression a mix of triumph and determination. Crossing her arms, Alice stared at me. "We're not getting a divorce," she announced defiantly. "I'm not letting you go. I love you." "You have a strange way of showing it," I muttered, glaring at her. She ignored the jab, continuing with her prepared speech. "There's something you need to understand," she said. "I've been dealing with a medical issue. Ever since high school, I've struggled with nymphomania. It started after prom night. When you took my purity, I've had these needs," Alice said, her voice trembling with what she must have thought was sincerity. I scoffed, shaking my head. "Alice, there are medications for that. You could have sought treatment instead of lying and cheating for over a decade." She shook her head, her expression pleading. "I've tried the medications," she insisted. "They don't work for me. They make me feel like a zombie, sluggish and dull. I can't live like that." Her tone softened as she leaned closer. "Rob, I love you. I've always loved you. I've never wanted anyone else the way I want you. But I have to meet my needs, and you can't keep up. That doesn't make you less of a man. You're a fantastic lover, but I need more than any one person can provide." I stared at her in stunned silence as she laid out her so-called solution. "I've drafted a post-nuptial agreement," she explained. "It allows me to have as many lovers as necessary to maintain my mental health. If you find it unacceptable, you can leave the marriage with nothing. But I think we can make this work." She slid the document toward me and handed me a pen. "Sign it," she said. I looked at her, incredulous. "You're out of your mind, Alice," I said, my voice low and steady. "Do you really think I'm going to agree to this?" Her two associates, the men who had grabbed me earlier, stepped closer, their presence a clear warning. I decided to play along, rising from the chair under their watchful eyes. I picked up the document and began to read. The terms were as absurd as she had described, stripping me of any dignity or autonomy. When I finished, I laughed bitterly. "This is a joke," I said, tearing the papers in half and tossing the pieces at her feet. "I'm not signing this." I turned to leave, but her associates moved to block my path. "Stop him!" Alice screamed. The first man lunged toward me, but I swung my briefcase hard, hitting him squarely on the head. He crumpled to the floor. The second man hesitated, and I took advantage of his uncertainty, landing a sharp punch to his jaw. As he staggered back, I followed up with a swift kick to his groin. He dropped to the ground, groaning in pain. Without a word, I grabbed my briefcase and headed for the door, my heart pounding. Suddenly, Alice's voice rang out, sharp and panicked. "Stop, or I'll shoot." I froze for a moment and turned to see her holding a gun. My fists clenched, my heart racing, but I ignored her threat and calmly pulled out my phone, dialing 911. When the operator answered, I gave my name, address, and a brief explanation. "My wife is threatening to shoot me," I said evenly. The operator urged me to remain calm and assured me that help was on the way. Ending the call, I looked at Alice with a smirk. "Thanks, Alice. I'm sure your trip to jail will really speed up this divorce." Her face twisted with anger. "You're an idiot," she spat. "When the cops get here, they'll arrest you. You came into my house and attacked my friends out of jealousy. They'll believe me. It's your word against ours." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, Alice, you're as delusional as ever. Do you really think Frank and Ruth, who saw your goons drag me out of work, won't testify against you?" I stepped closer, locking eyes with her. "You might fool the cops for a night, but once the witnesses testify and the evidence is reviewed, you'll be the one behind bars. And trust me, I'm not bailing you out." When the police arrived, I was the one in handcuffs, taken into custody while Alice smirked triumphantly. It was infuriating, but I knew this was just the beginning of her downfall. The next morning, I called Jack McAdam from my holding cell and explained everything. Jack wasted no time. He contacted Samuel Nelson, who provided the surveillance evidence to an assistant district attorney. The recordings were damning. They showed Alice's associates restraining me while she shouted threats. The audio also captured Alice admitting her plan to lie to the police and have her accomplices do the same. By Monday morning, during my bail hearing, Alice walked into the courthouse, ready to gloat. Instead, she was arrested on the spot. That evening, warrants were issued for her accomplices, Gustav and Ryan, and both were taken into custody. Alice's parents couldn't afford her bail, and I refused to help. When her lawyer suggested using the house as collateral, I hung up without a word. I returned to the motel, checked out, and moved back into the house, changing the locks the same day. Jack secured a restraining order, ensuring Alice couldn't come within 1,000 feet of me. Gustav and Ryan quickly turned on Alice, taking plea deals and painting her as the mastermind. Alice claimed she never intended to shoot me. I just wanted to stop him from hurting Gustav or Ryan, she told the jury. Her emotional plea won her some sympathy, and she was acquitted of felony menacing. However, she was found guilty of unlawful restraint, filing a false police report, and other lesser charges. The judge sentenced her to 9 months in county jail and 1,000 hours of community service. With Alice locked up, the divorce proceeded without issue. Aside from losing Alice, my only concession was transferring 20% of the house's equity to her bank account. It was a small price to pay for my freedom. With everything behind me, I decided to celebrate. I returned to the bar near the motel, ready to mark the start of my new life. To my surprise, Megan and Nicole were there, laughing together. Jessica wasn't with them. Her husband had returned from deployment. When I approached their table, Megan smiled. "Why celebrate with us?" she asked. Taking a deep breath, I grinned. Jessica and Nicole are married, but Megan, you're not wearing a ring or showing any signs you've ever worn one. That tells me there's no long-haul trucker in your life. Plus, I've always had a thing for gorgeous redheads. Nicole laughed, nudging Megan. "Girl, you're busted." Megan's cheeks turned pink, but she laughed too. "Well, cowboy, you've got me figured out," she said as I held out my hand. She took it, and I led her to the dance floor, the music carrying us into the night. For the first time in years, I felt like I was finally moving forward, leaving the pain behind and stepping toward something new.